that he, Nader, would stand in as the proxy for none of the above.
If he'd actually run in a Democratic primary, who knows what might have happened. But he didn't.
I got a letter from a number of environmentalists in California, led by the great environmentalist David Brower, and he wanted me to be on the ballot for president in California on the Green Party ticket. Never again, people are told by the Democrats or Republicans, essentially one corporate party with two heads, that millions of people have nowhere to go. We really need multi-party development in this country because we don't have a government of, by, and for the people. We have a government of the Exxons, by the General Motors, for the DuPonts. But it ended up not really a formal or even technically a campaign from the standpoint of the Federal Election Commission, and the two parties had a deaf ear. Most people feel they're losing control to the big guys, the fat cats that dominate the country. It doesn't matter whether they put a conservative, liberal, progressive label on. They don't like to see the country being taken from them, the democracy for sale.
I think what Ralph saw was a betrayal of democracy by the Democratic Party that started really in the mid to late 70s and continued on rapidly during the 80s.
It was something the Democrats had never done before. About 40 prospective congressional candidates lined up so they could be inspected by representatives of about 50 business political action committees.
There was a movement largely instigated by Tony Coelho, who at that time was the third-ranking member of the House leadership. The House and the Senate were both controlled by Democrats then. He said, there is no reason why the Republican Party should be getting all of those contributions.
Business PACs are sincerely and legitimately looking for Democratic candidates to support.
What we're really looking for is money, you see. Well, that's what we're here to talk to you about.
Most of the candidates thought it was a good idea. The Democrats finally doing for the first time something the Republicans have been doing for years.
Because of the K Street lobbyists, the only way we can compete in a basically two-party system is that we've got to raise somewhere near the amount of money that Republicans raise.
The result of that, of course, was that the Democratic Congressional Party became very compromised.
The corporations pay their, room, board, tuition, beer money, everything for these guys.
Sad to say, because that distorts the choices of people right from the beginning.
You had situations where Democrats who represented very progressive liberal districts would wind up voting for some corporation on some environmental issue, and everybody would say, what? And then you'd look closely and you would see the effect of a campaign contribution.
I figured that unless you have your own resources, a couple $100 million, you can't have the effect. And so I've given it up.
What does that say about a democracy?
I think our democracy is a fraud. I think it's a consumer fraud.
For 20 years, we saw the doors closing on us in Washington, our citizen groups and a lot of other citizen groups. And what are we here for? To improve our country. And we couldn't get congressional hearings, even with the Democrats in charge.
The Democratic Party was in as low a position in terms of any espousing progressive politics had ever been.
When we now confront a really ruthless Bush presidency, suddenly everybody before Bush looks good.
My fellow Americans.
Clinton, for instance, has been much overrated as a so-called liberal president. Clinton essentially followed the aggressive foreign policy that had existed before him. He initiated the idea of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. And in domestic policy, he was pitiful. I mean, it was Clinton who signed the bill doing away with federal aid to families with dependent children.
When Clinton and Gore wouldn't meet with Ralph in their last term on issues that Ralph really had something distinguishing to say on auto safety and regulation, for example, it infuriated Ralph, rightly so.
When I saw the neglect, the indifference, the greed, the corruption of the two parties. And I looked around and I said, hey, is there anyone else running for president? I mean, be my guest.
He would have welcomed a really progressive candidate, not just talking politics, but actually running and trying to get elected. And there just wasn't anyone on the horizon.
Nobody wanted to step forward. And year after year would go by. I didn't want to step forward. And then I began realizing that bad politics was driving out potential good candidates. That I would meet people all over the country who'd say, you know, I'd like to run for the Senate. I'd like to run for governor. I'd like to run for but it's such a dirty game. I don't want anything to do with it.
I've knocked on thousands of doors in my life campaigning, and I'll tell you, the number one comment I hear from people is, politicians, they're all crooks. Politicians, can't trust them.
In ancient Athens, politics was a glorious word. It was the word used as an antidote to autocracy. And now, these rascals in politics, this two-party elected dictatorship, has turned politics into such a dirty word that the whole idea of elected public service is now distasteful to thousands and thousands of wonderful people in this country. That's when I said, okay, that's the final straw. I have got to step forward.
I remember saying down through the years, people would come up to me and say, why doesn't Ralph run? And I said, forget it. He's not going to run. He's not going to run. And boom, he ran. I couldn't wait to get on the bus.
I remember George Stephanopoulos calling up and saying, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're running for president. You know, but that's how the mainstream press treated Ralph's campaign. Like, what is this oddity, this quirk?
There were a lot of hiccups in starting and launching Ralph's campaign, like he's starting late, and a party being as small as it is in a country that's not very tolerant of third parties.
The concrete goals were fairly mundane, but they were along the lines of, let's raise $5 million, let's try to get on the ballot in 45 states, let's try to get 5% of the electorate so we can help build the Green Party. Let's create a lot of local Greens. Let's bring in a lot of new talent into the citizen movement. Let's get the issues out there.
The very things we should do for the family pocketbook, more fuel-efficient cars, more solar energy, more fuel-efficient appliances, lighting, air conditioning systems, will also reduce the contribution to global warming. I would make sure corporations pay their fair share of taxes so the rest of the individuals don't have to pay what they're now paying. You know, if corporations paid the same rate of taxation as they did in the prosperous 1960s, we have another $250 billion in the Treasury. There are almost 50 million people in this country making less than 10 bucks an hour. 10 bucks. Some of them are making 8, 7, 6, 5.50. You can support a family on that? We're spending 15% of our economy on health care. 47 million Americans not covered, 20 more million grossly undercovered. The ones who are covered, they're getting hit with more co-payments, deductions, exclusions, give-backs, and negotiation with employers and pre-existing conditions. So I don't believe in Gore's step-by-step, and I don't believe in that phony package that George W. Bush put out last week either. We have a bunch of skulking, cowardly politicians in Washington. They don't want to go down in history as fighting for the people as much as they want to go down next week and get some cash from special interest groups.
Grilled tenderloin for fundraiser, $1,000 a plate. Campaign ads filled with half-truths, $10 million. Promises to special interest groups, over $10 billion. Finding out the truth, priceless. There are some things money can't buy. Without Ralph Nader in the presidential debates, the truth will come in last. Find out how you can help. Go to votenader.com.
One of our press people came to me and said, MasterCard called and they want us to pull the ad, and or else they're gonna sue us. And I said, oh, you're kidding. I said, bank my day.
The suit we filed asks for discontinuation of airing the spot on TV, as well as monetary damages of $5 million.
They had no sense of humor about it.
We've spent a lot of time developing the Priceless campaign, and we're very concerned that our consumers are confused.
It's amazing to me that MasterCard, would take the bait and try to sue him on that, and therefore just replicate the thing 1,000 times, have every TV station in America show it for nothing.
And they continue to sue us, but we won on all counts on summary judgment.
Priceless.
Yeah. I see it a little bit differently.
Initially, the Democratic Party and the Gore campaign paid very little attention to the Nader campaign. They thought, okay, third party, they're not going to get anywhere because we've already rigged the system. As the campaign developed in 2000 and they saw that we were getting, 5-7% in some major states that they were starting to get concerned about.
Came into the green room at CNN. And I walked in, there was the Democrats there, and there was Lanny Davis and some other guys, and it was, hey, Pat, how are you? Good going? Yeah, how's it going out there? And then Ralph came in behind me, and he said, hey, Pat, how are you? I said, hi, Ralph. And everybody backed away. And he said, they're shunning me. And he was right. They wouldn't even talk to him. And it was remarkable, but they really saw him as a mortal threat.
Nader's Raiders for Gore came about when Gary Sellers, who was one of the first people who worked for Ralph full-time in the summer of '69, had an argument with Ralph about the effect of Ralph's candidacy on a Democrat. Ralph poo-pooed it all. What did he say? I wish I were as knowledgeable as to the future that you are, or something like that. It was a really kind of a condescending comment and put him down. Gary came away from that really furious.
It's really sad. Ralph is a very sophisticated political thinker, a profound thinker. He knows what the consequences are.
And so Gary called us and said, look, we ought to put together a letter to Ralph, an open letter to Ralph, set up this, maybe we can help get Ralph out of the race.
The consequences are really profound. Of course it'll lurch the Democratic Party a little bit to the left, but it'll take 30 years to undo the harm that Ralph is going to do in the next 12 days.
And out of it came a composite letter that we presented to Ralph and opened up a website and got in business as Nader's Raiders for Gore.
Imagine his own former associates have turned against him. That always makes for newspaper copy.
Ralph's response to this bothered me a good deal. Ralph's public response was that, oh, these are just some people who worked for me a very long time ago, and they've gone on to their other activities. The implication being that whatever public interest we had years ago was long gone, and now we were out there working for Philip Morris or something like that.
I was approached by them, and I asked everybody who approached me simple questions. I said, how do you feel about universal health care? How do you feel about the death penalty? How do you feel about NAFTA? And then they would agree with me on all the issues. And I would say, so why are you supporting Gore?
I don't think there was anything that Ralph Nader stood for in his campaign that I didn't believe in. There wasn't anything that he said that I didn't think was right or wouldn't make this a better country if those policies were enacted. But it was very clear that Ralph Nader was not going to be elected president.
My feeling was, listen, I'm on the outside, I'm firing at Republicans, I'm firing at Democrats. I want to be free to do that. I'm not going to support anybody. I'm not going to run your campaign, Ralph. I'm not going to sign a letter opposing you. I'm completely out of it. And I think a lot of Nader's Raiders took that position because, as he taught us, we hit whoever gets elected. We want to be in a position to do that.
In late June of 2000, Ralph called me and he said, Greg, I want you to do an exquisite event for me when I'm in Portland on August 25th.
The Kafoury and McDougal team in Oregon said, well, why don't we rent the Coliseum in Oregon, which seats something like 10,000 people. We had to divert all the financial resources to be able to do that. And then because all of our financial resources were tied into doing that, we had to make sure they worked.
An hour into the show, they had completely sold out. They were turning people away. 10,000 people paid $7 a head just for Ralph. No entertainment, no music, just Ralph's political message. And the super rallies were born.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We did Seattle, we did Minneapolis, we did Boston, had a great event in Boston.
It was one rally at a time, and every rally had a tiny surplus and gave us an opportunity to go to the next city.
I remember he called me up and said, we're going to do New York City, Madison Square Garden. I said, okay, next month? He goes, no, in 10 days. And I said, are you crazy? 10 days, New York City, Madison Square Garden? He goes, no, you can do it.
$300,000 to do Madison Square Garden.
It was 10 days of no sleep, and it was quintessential Ralph, where it was like, we're doing this, and don't ask any questions, just do it. It can be done. I have faith in the people who are behind this, so let's do it.
We had Eddie Vedder, Ani DeFranco, Bill Murray, Tim Robbins, Susan Sarandon, Ben Harper, Patti Smith, Phil Donahue, Michael Moore. It was an unbelievable line.
Someone said to me, who are you going to vote for? And I said, I'm going to vote for Ralph Nader. Who are you going to vote for?
You understand that it is more than a win-or-lose situation. It's the bigger picture. And this is where that bigger picture begins.
We're at the place we're at because we have settled for so less for so long. If we keep settling, it's only going to get worse. The lesser of two evils, you still end up with evil. You still end up with evil.
It really gave me a lot of hope for our society because there are issues being talked about that night which had not been talked about in 20, 30 years in American politics.
The students are not learning. They're not learning citizen skills. They're not learning how to practice democracy. They're not learning the creative force of their personality and idealism and imagination. Maybe if we started talking about citizen globalization, civic globalization, instead of corporate globalization, the world will move forward. Let not future generations look back on us and say that this was the last generation that refused to give up so little in order to achieve so much.
He fights almost impossible battles, and he's won a number of them. He's not afraid. I think he's the best American I know.
I expected this to be on the front page of the New York Times. And we had a story, but it was buried, 20 pages in. No other political person, Bush or Gore, hadn't gotten 20,000 people to pay money to come hear them speak all campaign. Ralph was the only guy doing it, and yet the establishment media froze us out.
And the kind of coverage that we did get was all about the horse race. How are you going to affect Al Gore? From the very beginning months of the campaign, we knew in 2000 and in 2004 we would have to try to get into the presidential debates.
Ralph Nader could visit every city and town in this nation personally and not reach 10% of the people who watch the debates.
Now, most people don't understand how the presidential debates are run. They have memories of the League of Women Voters hosting it or something, or they think journalists host it. But it's really a private corporation that sits a few blocks away from here, New Hampshire Avenue in Washington, D.C., that is run by former chair of the Democratic National Committee and the former chair of the Republican National Committee.
One is the biggest lobbyist for the gaming industry. The other is a lobbyist as well, both. Frank Fahrenkopf and Kirk produced. They were producers, so they decided which candidates the voters could see. And their sponsors were Anheuser-Busch, U.S. Airwaves, corporations. Can you imagine how much an American corporation would want Ralph Nader on that stage?
They set criteria that says you have to have 15% of the measure of support measured by the average of 5 different national polls.
But if what we're picking is a poll number, then what we're in effect saying is, we'll allow you in the debates if we think you're a factor in the election. And so in an election in which now the Gore world wants to say, Ralph Nader lost the election for us, I guess he must have been a factor in the election. But you said he couldn't be in the debates because he wasn't a factor in the election.
You had, polls showed 2/3 of the American people wanted him in the debates.
Well, because Ralph Nader speaks to issues that the other 2 candidates are ignoring. Both candidates are pro-death penalty, for instance.
To look at which issues concern the American public. Fairly broad swath of them were not being covered in the debates, as far as we can tell.
But they froze Ralph out of the debates.
The first debate between Gore and Bush was Tuesday, the 3rd of October, in Boston.
The campaign had decided that if we weren't going to be able to be in the actual debate on the stage, that we were going to try to be in the debate hall.
30 seconds.
I got a phone call from Ralph's entourage that was touring with him at about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And they said, Jason, what we really want for tomorrow is a ticket to the debate. We got this kid, University of Massachusetts, where the debate was going to be held, and his dad had gotten him a ticket. Call this kid. And I said, how would you, in the name of democracy, like to have a press conference tomorrow at Harvard where you hand over your ticket to Ralph Nader and say, I think you should be there at this debate? And the kid loved it.
There were lots of people protesting the exclusion of third parties, including, I should mention, not just the Greens. The Libertarians are upset. The other third parties would like to have a chance to talk to the American people.
With my brother, and he wondered, oh, how I am. I said what I believe.
And then we hopped on the T, and we rode to this staging area for the debates because there was huge security around the debates. Three perimeters and all the Secret Service and hundreds of cops and so forth. And there were also well over 5,000 people there protesting to let my uncle on the debates.
It was an unbelievable scene. It was like out of some, gigantic painting of a semi-revolutionary journey.
As we started passing these barricades and these thousands of people, they recognized my uncle inside the bus, and they just went crazy. Our ticket was for a video of the debate, where we would watch it from a remote location.
I was confronted by someone who said he was in charge of security for the debate commission, a private security firm.
And they said, you, Mr. Nader, are not welcome. The man who came out had a Greek last name. It was Viserys. And my uncle greeted him in Greek, and so it sort of threw him off a little bit. It was pretty comical. But he immediately reverted to, Mr. Nader, you're not welcome here. Okay, here's the situation.
Yeah.
We have an arrangement to do a show with Fox. Their truck is inside. We could walk through with our ticket, sit in the truck, watch the debates, and do the show.
Yeah, that's not an option, sir.
Right now, the commission is saying they will not let us through the gate to sit in the Fox truck to watch the show, the debate, and then proceed with the interview. So the officers are telling us once again that the commission's decision is to have us leave the premises.
I kept saying to myself, I can't believe I'm in America. I can't believe this is going on. Gentlemen, I think you're being subjected to an unlawful order, and you really ought to go to your superiors, because a private party cannot misuse the status of the state police. You're the state police.
Correct,
Right.
yes.
They cannot do that.
Okay, what's going to happen is now we have two options.
Yeah.
You were warned once before that if you return, you were going to be placed under arrest for trespassing. Is it your intent to be arrested?
Of course not. And I have never been arrested, and I will not be
Well,
arrested.
we're
I'm
still
just
going to
saying.
give you the option, Mr.
I don't
Nader, to
understand.
please leave the scene, or you're going to be placed under arrest for trespassing. That's it. I really don't want to get in a debate with you out here. We'll give you a police escort off the grounds, or we'll in fact give you a ride off the grounds, or in fact you can be placed under arrest for trespassing and physically taken off the grounds.
Let me please.
What would we like to do right now?
Let me please, Mr. McPhail, let me please just reply to you. I have no understanding why you are being instructed to do this. We have an official invitation from one of the major television networks.
Well, they're not allowing you access to the grounds.
Who's not allowing? The debate commission?
The debate committee, correct, sir.
And they have
I
to.
really do not want
Wait,
to get
no,
in
I
an
don't want.
argument
No,
with
I don't
you
want
on
to
this.
argue.
You seem like too nice of a man to
No, I don't
argue.
want to argue with. All I want to ask you is, this is a political exclusion. I'm not a security risk. I'm not being disrupted. This is a political exclusion. You should not be misused. The authority of the state of Massachusetts should not be misused for a political exclusion of a presidential candidate who has a ticket to be in Kripke Auditorium, to watch the debate on remote television, and who has an official invitation from Fox News. So, I make my point.
Very good.
This is the strangest situation I've ever seen.
How are we going to get you off the property, Mr.
We have to get a bus or whatever.
The Presidential Debate Commission excluded Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan from the presidential debates. But they also wouldn't even let Mr. Nader into the hall. The independent presidential candidate was given a legitimate ticket by a student supporter for a remote area in the auditorium. But acting like thugs, officials threatened to have him arrested if he didn't leave the premises. Presumably, Mr. Nader's presence might have offended some of the commission's fat cat contributors in their prominent seats.
I give him credit. He went down there. I told him, you know, I went to parochial school, and I'm told you don't go somewhere, you don't go somewhere.
He should not have left, and he could have made his point that way by being escorted out manually by the police, and he could have had a bigger impact in the 2000s.
Perhaps, but it would have been a very short time, and the complications of being a defendant would have been longer term, and it would have been a defensive situation on my part, not an offensive situation, which what I turned it into when I sued the Commission on Presidential Debates.
They threw out the wrong guy this time.
Turns out we found in a subsequent lawsuit that their counsel had passed around a Facebook.
They had Ralph's picture they gave all the cops?
Sheets of paper with the pictures of all the third-party candidates and their vice presidential candidates, and basically said if any of these people show up on the premises, don't let them in.
They had a picture of me that I was going to break in? Okay, this is the Facebook. Kind of look out for these guys, huh? Ralph was the #1 guy they're looking for. He's on the top of the list.
The commission did write a written apology, and they ended up giving $50,000 to the Electoral Reform Project at Harvard Law School.
It all backs up to the guys outside the Capitol with the briefcases funding the people who make a vote and can make or break billions and billions of dollars worth of business. Their life is the price of their stock, and Ralph Nader threatens that, and we cannot overstate the power that they bring to stop him from doing that, including the power to decide that he is not going to get on this stage.
And Nader is showing no signs of backing off.
Gore is going to have to understand he's going to have to earn his votes. Bush has to earn his votes. I have to earn my votes. No one's entitled to any votes.
The bottom line, Renee, is it's not over until the votes are counted, and I mean really counted, one by one. Twice we've taken back so-called final results in Florida.
My guess is that in a lot of the Nader instances that he got new voters to the poll, as much as Jesse Ventura did when he ran in the state of Minnesota. People who were turned off by the political system altogether decided that they would turn out and vote for Ralph Nader. They would not have voted for either Al Gore or for George Bush.
In fact, many people say they would have stayed home. if those two names alone had been on the ballot and just sat on their hands and not voted for either candidate.
But you know what Democrats are going to say. If their candidate loses by 1% and Ralph Nader got 2, they're not going to look at the exit polls, Katie. They're going to point their finger and say, Ralph Nader, you're a spoiler, fairly or unfairly.
If you look at the numbers in Florida alone, I think it's safe to say that Ralph Nader denied Al Gore a clean victory in Florida. It may be true in other cases as well, but he has had a consequential impact on this presidential election.
By the way, I do think that Al Gore cost me the election, especially in Florida. And that's far greater concern than whether I was supposed to help elect Al Gore.
The day after the election, Ralph Nader was the happiest man in America outside the state of Texas and Florida. I won't forget that. His exultation at what he had proved. To whom?
And I would currently advise Ralph, given the numbers I've seen, that he may be interested in Secret Service protection when he comes in here this morning from some angry Democrats.
Up and down the street, people would stop me and say things like, God, Nader lost us the election. And, you know, it's so horrible. And, you know, I'd say, well, Gore lost you the election. He ran a shitty campaign.
For Nader to say that he has no responsibility in that matter is a level of ethical dishonesty and incomprehension that I find absolutely flabbergasting.
Every third-party candidate got more than the difference between Bush and Gore in the 537 votes in Florida, but the Democratic Party was looking for a scapegoat, and I think effectively tried to paint, and did paint, Ralph Nader as the reason why they were not in office, not the fact that 10 million more Democrats voted for George Bush and voted for Ralph Nader. They should have been asking, why are the people who are registered Democrats voting for George Bush rather than Ralph Nader?
You know, there were registered Democrats who voted for Bush. There were registered Republicans who voted for Gore. You know, this is like, you know, the dog ate my homework. Except that, you know, it wasn't my dog. Everybody else's dog ate my homework. This is not intellectually serious, and it's not ethically serious.
Why do they lose their own state? Al Gore is from Tennessee. He didn't carry his own state. He didn't carry Clinton's state, Arkansas. These are incumbent vice president for 8 years who doesn't carry his home state and the state of his, you know, president. Those are the kinds of questions, not that a third party, be it the Greens or the Libertarians or, you know, any third party, got some sliver of the vote.
You can invent all kinds of excuses as to why other people are responsible. Bill Clinton is responsible because he didn't carry Arkansas. Al Gore's responsible because he didn't carry Tennessee. Bullshit. One man could have stopped it. That's Ralph Nader. He chose not to.
Why did they do so poorly in Florida in terms of the post-election legal strategies? Why didn't they insist every vote should count?
I can spend all day listing the mistakes that Democrats made, both before and after Florida. I mean, before and during Florida, but I don't care. Nader professed to be standing for one thing when in fact he was deliberately causing another thing. The Democrats were just incompetent. Nader was dishonest, and the country is paying the price for it.
These people are their certitude is born out of the fact that they know now what happened.
It was entirely predictable what the likely outcome of that race was, and this megalomaniac thought that his campaign was more important than the potential destruction of much of what he claims to stand for.
To claim that they were Tweedledee and Tweedledum is to be politically idiotic. It's the responsibility of a serious person not to be a fool. And that was garbage.
A lot of people say, well, he said there was no difference. He didn't say there was no difference between the candidates. He said there are few differences for which they're actually willing to stand up and fight.
Okay, you have two corporate parties, but the differences are simply enormous. You don't get, from the Democrats, you don't get big pushes for constitutional amendments to ban gay marriage, and you don't get the Labor Department telling Walmart it'll have 15 days to notice before an inspection possible child labor abuses. It's on and on with this stuff.
And they killed him for saying that there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. They killed him. And then the Democrats spent the next 4 years proving that he was right. You know, the Democrats folded on the war. They folded on health care. No child left behind. They hid under their desks.
If the game was to get 5% so that you could get standing for the 2004 election under the election code, then he should have campaigned in safe states like New York and California, where he had many, many potential votes to pick up.
Our campaign was not going to play favorites between the two parties. We're going to go for as many votes as we can get, and we were going to be the only campaign to go with the candidates in every state.
He told a lot of his contributors, right, that he wasn't going to go into the swing states in 2000.
No, I said I'm not going to go out of my way to go into the swing states.
But then he changed his mind, and then he couldn't resist the competitive part of it. And so he went into the swing states.
From the very beginning, we were very clear on two things. One, Ralph would not drop out, and this would be a 50-state campaign.
He promised he wouldn't run hard where it was going to be close. And then he went and spent all of his time at the end of the campaign in swing states.
I spent 27 or 28 days in California and 2.5 days in Florida. I mean, if anything, I neglected a swing state like Florida.
It's true that he was in Florida right before the election.
I think we spent half a day there and then came up the East Coast.
I think Nader intended to be a spoiler. I think Nader is a Leninist. He thinks things have to get worse before they get better.
So I viewed those as empirical questions that needed to be answered by social scientists, that launching opinions back and forth probably wasn't going to solve the debate. And so I simply went out and looked at his campaign schedule from Labor Day of 2000 to Election Day. I looked at all the campaign stops he personally made. So these were places where he held a rally or some other event that was open to the public and gathered media attention. And I matched those to the media markets in which they happen or the states in which they happen. And I also looked at his TV advertising, so where did he run ads? And as I cut the data in every possible way, both his candidate appearances and his TV ads, I couldn't find any evidence that he was trying to spoil. There's just nothing there. There was lots of evidence that he was trying to maximize his vote. I've been a Democrat as long as I've been involved in politics. I voted for Al Gore. Actually, my interests are with the Democratic Party first, and yet when I look at the data, I find the pattern you wouldn't expect, that there's no evidence that he was trying to hurt the Democrats, and that most of my fellow Democrats' complaints are just sour grapes or a misunderstanding or something else.
52% of the country voted against Bush, either for Nader or Gore. The only way those numbers could have ensured a Gore victory is if Ralph Nader had gone on television the night before the election and said, okay, we've run a good race, we've raised a lot of important issues, but in fact there is a dime's worth of difference between these two parties. And I was wrong to say what I did, and it's just there's too much power in this office, there's too much at stake to risk a Republican takeover of the presidency.
I have no memory of a candidate ever dropping out at the presidential level because of fear of costing anyone a victory. I've just never seen that.
Why would somebody who has gone and recruited, tens of thousands of volunteers, donors, young people, and gone all around the country, and why would they drop out at the last minute? What message does that send? I'm sorry you supported me for no good reason. I'm sorry these issues don't belong on the table. That would never come out of Ralph Nader's mouth.
The Nader campaign was polling at close to 5% near the end of the 2000 campaign. So a campaign that was geared towards that goal would absolutely keep going. It would make no sense to drop out. It would be irrational to try to avoid an outcome that really puts you close to the goal you've been pursuing all along, from his entrance in February to the election day in November.
If Nader meant what he said, he would have run his race inside the Democratic Party and tried to take it over the same way the Christian Coalition took over the Republican Party.
You run as a Democrat, you're done in March, and you're no longer part of the debate. And you're making it too easy for them to channel you and to get rid of you and then ultimately to silence you. That's how they treat it.
If you want to pull the party, the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking. You must show them that you're capable of not voting for them.
Because the way the Democratic Party is run now for quite a number of presidential cycles is they pick a nominee in a kind of half-assed process that doesn't really represent much of anybody, and then they tell everybody to just shut up. Don't bring up anything that will complicate life for your nominee. You know he's not for you on this. Why badger him? He's not going to be for you for reasons that you don't understand but are good reasons. Shut up. Turn off your brains.
If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party because the left had nowhere to go.
I mean, it was absolutely the most brutal thing to support Ralph in the 2000 election.
Oh, there was a terrifically bad fallout, a terrible fallout. A lot of members quit, and we were in terrible financial straits, for a year and a half, 2 years as a result. It took a long time to build it back up again.
I had artists leave my label. I had one very famous artist say he wasn't going to do a song for me anymore because of my support for Ralph. And it was probably the hardest day of my life, and I could not imagine what Ralph was going through at the time.
Ralph Nader came to a press conference in support of my candidacy for governor. Somebody came in and threw a pie in his face.
The Democrats just totally trashed the guy, and they have been trashing him for 4 years. They're the meanest bunch of motherfuckers I have ever run across.
Morning, thank you very much for coming. I'm Ralph Nader, and I'm on the independent ticket for president with my vice presidential running mate, Peter Miguel Camejo.
No rational person could believe that it was a gift to the world to do what he did in the year 2000. So in order to protect his belief that he was, after all, doing the right thing, he needs to repeat. He needs to do it again.
To me, he's a very deluded man. He's a psychologically troubled man. To continue to argue that he's a force for progressive forces when he's the single most important reason we have the most reactionary president, perhaps in the history of the United States, is a form of delusion that I don't understand its source.
We are not convincing you with any of our words, so I'm just going to say, because of all your great service, and because we do really love you, but we disagree with you on this, Michael and I are going to get down on our knees and beg you not to run. Please. Ralph, run for president. Because you're a great American. Don't run. Please.
Don't do this.
Please.
Don't do this, Ralph. Come home, Ralph.
Come on. We're on our knees.
We're on our knees. Come home.
Fight these Republicans.
A number of people tried to convince Ralph not to run. And amongst that were people who thought, because they have very little firsthand knowledge of Ralph Nader, that they could bribe him.
Well, let me tell you, there were carrots and there were sticks. Nader was told, if you don't run, we will lavish money on your organizations. We will lavish money anywhere you want it. Very extravagant sums of money were mentioned. And he was told face to face, this is just the beginning.
Oh, yes. I mean, through third parties, millions of dollars were offered for our programs and projects if I would drop out or if I would not decide to run.
And at the same time, he was told, if you do run, we will strangle your organizations. We will smother them. Your people will scream in pain at you for what we're going to do to you.
Again, there was far more at stake in terms of focusing on the redirections of our country than some ample foundation grants to initiate programs which would hit a stone wall here in Washington.
I mean, the lesson Ralph took from the 1960s when lots of close friends of his said, you can't go after General Motors, you're a promising lawyer, you're out of Harvard, you'll ruin your career, and he did, was trust your own instincts and don't listen necessarily to people who are close to you.
Last night I talked to my slammed down the phone on him.
We get out of the blue. Gene, Ralph. I go, who? Oh, you calling? Well, he goes, well, I've been kind of busy the last 10 days. Because he just didn't know. I said, yeah, no shit. I'm busy right now, so I got to go. That was it. I was surprised I did it, but it was the right thing to do.
The meeting with John Kerry was very constructive. He had been saying just the right thing.
I'm going to appeal to everybody in this race, and we'll make it unnecessary in the end for an alternative, and I look forward to that.
Fine. It's just the exact kind of competition I relish in. Take all the issues. Here they are, 25 pages. I sent them to you in December. Take them all. No proprietorship here. And then I said to him, look, let's try to do something counterintuitive. Let's pick 3 major issues that we both believe in and run with them. And that will make a real contrast with Bush, corporate welfare, the hundreds of billions of dollars out of taxpayer coffers going into corporate subsidies, handouts, giveaways, bailouts. Let's also crack down on the corporate crime wave. A lot of Republican voters there. Bush is never going to come out against corporate crime. And the third thing, labor law reform, because you know that Bush is not going to come out for labor law reform given his corporate paymasters. He wouldn't buy them. Instead, May 2004 was when the massive coordinated attack by the Democratic Party to harass us, to intimidate us, petitioning drives, to file more and more lawsuits against us, hiring Ken Starr's old law firm, Kirkland Ellis, and other corporate Republican firms. That was the fork in the road. Those 3 issues would have gotten him more votes, and the election wouldn't even have been close.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
I have never seen a period in American history so devoid of any tactical and strategic sense by the liberals.
And I will hunt down and kill the terrorists wherever they are.
What are they scared of, the Democrats? When Kerry was running for office, there was a poll where 42% of the American people wanted the troops home yesterday. Without any leadership by the Democratic Party. Without saying to Bush, you don't have the decency even to count the casualties on our side because you're not counting injured and sick troops. I mean, when you can't even go after them for something like that.
And what we have to decide is that we're going to keep coming back until this war ends.
And you let the swift boat veterans turn you on the defensive because you were in Vietnam and Bush was a draft dodger? It's like they've lost their nerve completely. And they basically said, okay, the Republicans are so terrible, we'll go for the Democrats and then work on them later. But the point is, if you work on them later, it's too late. You got to work on them during the election campaign to make them look better, to make them stand taller, to make them be more authentic. Then you might get them into office.
Kerry's not perfect, but he's so much better than what's there now.
The united goal should be to defeat Bush. Anybody but Bush.
Now, let's say he did win. He wouldn't owe any of these people anything because he knew that he got their vote because they disliked Bush so much. What are you going to win if you win? So he would have no mandate. And he would float into Washington, D.C., and be surrounded by 25,000 corporate lobbyists and 9,000 corporate political action committees and all kinds of demands to put high-level appointments in the hands of corporate selectors in his administration. And what do we end up with? What is the victory worth? See? I mean, it was a flawed strategy. And for all their efforts, they lost.
Earlier today, I spoke to President Bush, and I offered him and Laura our congratulations on their victory.
They lost with a candidate who should have landslided Bush, who should have landslided one of the worst presidents in American history. And it's not an unwarranted perception to say that this Bush regime and the ideological hijackers who've taken over our government is a different cup of tea than Reagan or Bush 1 or Nixon. Then you better start making your candidate stand for the things you believe in that will oppose and thwart this extremely dangerous incumbent administration. So, not making Kerry better, they made him worse, they made him less electable.
When your guy, Ralph Nader, is very close to filing something about what went on in New Hampshire.
Oh, now he's my guy.
Well, our guy.
Boy, you got away from him awfully quick. He was your guy the last time, too, as I recall.
Our guy.
It gets hard because I know Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon had a lot of backlash after the election. The worst part is that people aren't going to be venturing out on those ledges again because there's nothing in it for them except a lot of criticism.
You want me to take a second here and talk about Ralph? Yeah.
Michael Moore was an example of the switch of aggressively supporting our agenda and our candidacy in 2000 and turning against us in 2004.
Leave him alone? Well, he needs to leave us alone.
In 2000, he went to our rallies, and he was the most articulate critic. He made people laugh and cry.
If you don't vote your conscience now, when will you start?
Then 2004 comes along.
And when you go in the voting booth, don't go in there like, oh, this is going to make me feel good, though. I'm going to feel good voting for Ralph Nader because he's pure, and I'm pure, and I want to feel good. So I'm going to vote for Nader. Listen, my friends, your parents must have told you when you were 14, 5 minutes of feeling good, you got to pay for it for the rest of your life. Come on.
And I'm trying to say why.
When he's involved in politics and it's that controversial, it doesn't help a nonprofit organization. And I think that, everyone knows that Ralph founded Public Citizens, pictures all over the building and all the rest of it. But it looks like we're politicking for him when we send out letters, thousands of letters every single day with his name on it. And I think that puts us at risk, both legally and politically. It's a time for us to be our own organization. He gave us a lot, that's it.
I wish Ralph hadn't run. You want me to say more? I'm wrestling with both the personal answer to your question and the professional answer. On a professional level, I think the election distracted Ralph from issues that, he would have been a leading figure on, for example, Enron and WorldCom and the energy crisis here in California. I also think that some people were offended by his run and angry with him for it, and that's probably hurt him with those people. On a personal level, I miss him.
My son's 11 and my daughter is 9. And they go, Dad, you used to work for that guy? It's like, you should be proud of this. I was proud of this. My parents. When I first started, I was so proud of all that. And, my parents come down, meet Ralph Nader. He's from Connecticut. That was so cool. They were so proud of it. Now, every time what's that crazy guy up to? And that's like a focus group of, middle America. People who actually, again, care about the same things. But, it's like, just lost it. It's sad. Let's just stop talking about it. In case you haven't figured it out, angry and sad. Okay. That's enough.
Very good. Thank you. Part of the reason he's running is he wants to be heard. Is that ego? I guess. But it's not just the ego of fame, which he's had. It's the ego of trying to make a difference. If that sounds sappy, that's the way he operates. He is privately on the phone the way he is in public. Outraged by injustice. It's not an act. And that's what motivates him. That's what's motivating him to run for president.
You cannot know him and even imagine that this is an ego trip. If anything, it's the opposite, because people who are soothing their egos and gratifying them don't do without sleep, don't run on shoestring budgets, don't withstand the kind of abuse that he's gotten.
In fact, if it were ego, he wouldn't do it. because the likelihood that he ruins a 40-year reputation as being this pro-justice hero would lead most people, if they have an ego, to go, I'm not going to risk hurting myself like that.
The issue is if you get things out in the open, you'll get some action.
One of the things, along with my dismay at what he's doing about the country here with this running for president, is a real concern that Ralph could seriously harm his legacy.
Ralph's legacy is insinuated into the fabric of our daily life in ways we don't even appreciate.
Imagine if you got in a car and the airbag said Nader on it. You know, like how everything says Trump on buildings? If the airbag said Nader, or if the seatbelt said Nader, or if you get bumped from a plane and it says your remuneration on your ticket and you get it Ralph Nader on your ticket. Or, you know, you look at the air and it's cleaner and it says Ralph Nader. Or if you look at your food and it says this food was made safer by Ralph Nader. If people would see that on a day-to-day basis, they'd understand the effect that this guy has had on their daily lives.
Lead protections when you get x-rays in the dentist's office, warnings, drugs, nutrition labeling on foods, crash testing for automobiles, labeling for cigarettes and tar and nicotine, labeling for tires on their treadwear and safety, the right to know on the job if you're exposed to any chemicals.
This was a cause, and we bought into it, we believed it, and we continue to believe it. And anything that affects Ralph's legacy affects us. So I wouldn't want this to hurt his legacy.
I don't care about my personal legacy. I care about how much justice is advanced in America and in our world day after day. And I'm willing to sacrifice whatever, quote, reputation in the cause of that effort. And also, what is my legacy? Are they going to turn around and rip seatbelts out of cars? Are they going to tear airbags out of cars?
Nader really kind of taught me to have that future perspective, go into the future and look back. And don't care what people are saying about you now, because they're not as important as the people in the future are, because that's who you're working for. You're working to pass it down the line. You're working to pass it on to the next generation after that and after that and after that, and that's why you are here.
I can't think of anyone in American history who better embodies the ethic, you can fight City Hall, than Ralph Nader. So often people go, oh, my vote doesn't count, or oh, these big interests, you know, I can't affect it. His whole life, just this no name from Winstead, Connecticut, not because of pedigree or money, talks and wills his way into the national consciousness, and then stands for the ethic that consumers can stand up to corporations and voters can stand up to incumbents.
I've been in Japan, I've been in Eastern Europe, Hungary, right after the Berlin Wall fell, Southeast Asia, reporting with various kinds of citizen groups, whether they were campaigning for laws or to take some of the brutality out of sweatshops. And they will invoke Nader's name as a kind of, you know what we're doing, it's like Ralph Nader, right? I mean, now where did they learn that? Who knows? But it's in their vocabulary that this man Nader did what we're doing, what we're trying to do.
I suspect that he'll suffer waves over the next 100 years of discovery, rediscovery, and abandonment. That periodically, as the cultural heartbeat hears a different song, it will yearn for his song and find him. It's happened to many people.
Ralph is, he believes in the legal system. I mean, it's really incredible. The guy is like, he's pushing all this stuff, and he actually believes in the legal system. And he believes in small business, his family is small business. And he believes, he's a devout small business supporter. And he believes in the marketplace. I mean, it's just amazing to me that he believes in the market. He believes in all these really American things of the American grain. And he gets trashed for it. I mean, he's one of the very few people who's ever been in this city who actually believes in the American myth.
I see how people up against enormous abuse, deprivation, dictatorships, you name it, taking it on, not giving up, persisting, persevering. That's what life's all about. There'll never be a hill that you don't have to climb when it comes to injustice in this world. But you have to keep climbing it. And the important thing is not to say democracy is a myth in our country. It's to have better gradations. Democracy is very weak today in our country. We have to make it stronger and stronger until it becomes the profoundly realistic American way of life and crowds out the myths.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long. Thieves in the temple, too much money changing hands. It's really very simple, just make a list of demands. We demand freedom, we demand equality, we demand justice. It ain't gonna happen until folks like you and me just stand up. Well, you've been sitting way too long. Oh, step up. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. Rise up. Don't let the system hold you down. Stand up. Ooh. Stand up. Ooh. You've been sitting way too long. Well. Say you're tired of trying. You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice? Don't let them fool you. You have the power in your hand. I'm only trying to school you. Listen to me, people. Do you understand? We gotta stand up. Oh, you've been sitting way too long. Oh, step up. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. Rise up. Don't let the system hold you down. Stand up. Hey, stand up. Hey, you've been sitting way too long. Stand up. Oh, you should. Step up. Step up. I think that you should step up. Rise up. Rise up and take over power. Stand up. Hey, stand up. Hey, you've been sitting way too long. Stand up. Oh, stand up. Oh, step up. Step up. You ought to step